So good morning and welcome to my morning. I'm sipping on coffee, listening to music, drinking ice water, cleaning up the vehicle for a long day's work, and trying to be the rock star in my own life to my own loved one as much as I possibly can. But that brings us to a new issue, one that I'm extremely aware of, one that I've always had heightened senses for, one that I've started to write about, that I started to write about 10 plus years ago, where it became evident and epic, unavoidable, that people are filled with forces instantly, as if they are taken command of. And it could be a moment where they feel overconfident. It could be an endocrine surge where they feel a certain empowerment with adrenaline. It could be a certain behavior cue that you set off, but they are at the heightened state of awareness and readiness. And more so, I put a lot of thought and a lot of research into this. And as I was researching other things, I would start to look at human behavior out there in the real world. Not a psychological diagnosis, but I would study that as much as possible. You know, certain deviant behaviors, particularly leading toward, well, at first it was more borderline histrionic, and then it turned into full-blown narcissism. And now what I see is that all these are really under the guise of conformity. So you have these master conformists. Yeah, we'll call it that. When we think of conformism as something that where you just relent for your daily bread, the antithesis, the antithetical to the transcendentalist movement, where you don't smile for your daily bread and you don't give away money to somebody who's merely begging or asking you for it. You're looking at the broader picture, more steps in society, a better society, where people have to have autonomy and stand up for themselves. Well, in democracy, which is the falsified notion that works antithetical to the constitutional republic that we live in, there is a capitalistic meritocracy that instantly voids and nulls all true democratic solutions, and pushes toward a level of communism and socialism that creates existentially backward engineer, creates insane people. So that gets me to the topic, the subject that I'm talking about, and that is something's happened recently. And this is the 11th of October, 2024. Some may say we are on the precipice of war. Others may say the war already arrived. It started with a proxy war long ago. That the globalist agenda for the greater good is the push. And first you got to have some blood. You got to have some losses. You have to have a reorganization. But the problem is that all these clandestine organizations that are working toward a certain ideology are not focused on the same effort, on the same thing, on the same goal. They don't think they are. So right now you've got people who are policing, who absolutely don't understand the Constitution. They don't even understand the side of the constitutional republic. Otherwise they would protect free speech and other people's rights, right? The right to hang out at a public park, the right to be able to drive around aimlessly, and if that's all you've got, the right to not loiter, but once proven to be somebody who has paid their car registration, paid their car note, obviously, kept themselves up and clean, is working, and is in a public place for a viable reason, that is now become racially obscured through contradicting religious beliefs. And now you don't know who's going to attack you from what side. And I believe that this is the time, this is the era that is set forth where you could go biblical with it, and you could say that in a household, the family members themselves are going to adhere to and uphold certain principalities that work, like I say, juxtaposed to and antithetical to the very people that they are just within arm's length of. A hatred. And I hate to say it, but you're seeing it become more evident by the day. And you're seeing violent outlash discourse, conversations that begin for no reason, lead nowhere, and can only end in bloodshed and violence. So I would say alert, alert. We've reached that point of no return. We have reached that point, and that point of no return can be seen on a macro scale. Once it's evident on a micro scale and it has seeped its way into the noggin, into the nervous system, into the spinous system, and it has created this amygdala reaction, you've got a heightened state of alertness. You have the fight or flight, which is set off, and people are staring outside their windows, they're staring at each other. They have become existential nightmares, not only to themselves, especially to themselves, but by trying to be overly reactive and put up their guard, they have now become anxiety-ridden, hyper-paranoid, and parasitic. And so you can't even trust your neighbor or the person next to you in an emergency situation. So those who are calling for, a community, and I try to urge this, I've been talking about this for some years now. For a while, I believed that unity and community was something that could take place existentially, and if I could go above 100%, which I believe that numbers do go up over 100% and sort of bow back down through a bell curve, if you will, with a systematic spike where something has to go through a super compensation phase. You have to be able to handle major levels of depletion and overage as far as what your capacity is, and that those capacities through the nervous system and the endocrine system are not possible by your average everyday plebeian who thinks that they are a celebrity. So you have all these attributes, let's say, all these qualities, let's call them, working synonymously, almost like if you were to look at if you were to look at an equalizer, and you've got one of these is way down here and the other is way up here, and they're out of sync, right? There's no homeostasis, there is no balance, and therefore there can be no order. So, and it does come down to an intelligence. I was arguing with somebody the other day that approached me, and then somebody yesterday approached me again for the same reason. I'm just trying to take my son to the public park. I'm just trying to park around the public park and spend time. It's very obvious that I'm an older guy and that I have a special needs adult son, and we're trying to do our best to work with what little means we have. Everyone's in the same boat, but people are taking on and this isn't just isolated to this situation. I also watch First Amendment audit channels such as Long Island Audit with Sean. I love what he does. I think it's great, but it's also not congruent with what I'm talking about, that leads into very scary realms and very scary areas where you can only look at Nathaniel J. Gillis and his assertions with this singular entity that has a very that's very intelligent by design, doesn't seem to make errors, and works so systematically that it could only be really considered in part and parcel to how a computer system would behave, but it seems to have an extremely malevolent focus, a long game, if you will. So that's what I've been looking at. Like, ultimately, someone can have, homicidal tendencies. Somebody can have violent, deviant aspects to their personalities. But when, even psychologists in the past have demarked areas where if you think violent thoughts and allow yourself to think through those, you become less likely to act them out. Well, what's happening is when you've got this reactive state of mind and it has embedded itself into nervous system reactive responses, the neocortex is not involved at all. And when you're thinking this way, when you're drinking this stuff, and that's why I'm switching gears this month, I'm going back on to what I did years ago. I didn't want to appear gaunt. I didn't want to feel energyless, because the orthomolecular nutrition plan, where I've got a 5-pound container of whey protein waiting for me, and I've urged my son to stay in and not go out, because as much as this looks like a parking lot where nobody's watching and it's very serene and you're just getting your time in, those people up in the windows, these cameras, right? People behind you waiting at the bus stop and walking in the shadows are staring at you from the dark with hyper-paranoia, and they don't realize that they are the ones who have become the monsters. So when we are referred to as monsters and villains, right? It's that final precipice, that final notion, that final place where we make our decisions and decide the type of behavior. Form follows function, function into form, become what you are. When our behaviorism reaches a certain cataclysmic place where there is no return, and the human body cannot forget, you can't unsee what you've seen. You either have to go through a place of processing that type of trauma and thought process, or you go into a reactive state, and that's called war. So we have reached the place where civil war has already ensued. It's already set in. And unfortunately, these are physical confrontations that start out as arguments, petty arguments that have no basis, no foundational basis. You're just exercising your constitutional rights. Well, back to the First Amendment audits. As much as I love watching Sean, and as necessary as I think it is to go through that process of exercising your First Amendment rights that lead into so many other areas of constitutional rights, the right to bear arms, the right to organize a peaceful militia, right? And, illegal search and seizure, and of course, freedom of press, freedom of speech, extremely important. And it really is, contingent upon that one thing. Well, your fellow will organize a coup against you, and you will start to see people getting stoned, getting rocks thrown at them again, like the Scarlet Letter, like the pointing of charlatan. You could mention many other times, I think of Peter Bruegel and the whole invasion, Catholic invasion into Dutchland. And I think of the witch burning, not the true cause or aim to rid society and the world of people doing craft, but the recognition of this and the misuse of it, where people were accused and blamed of practicing malicious, malignant type of thought processes that were craft and had an organized way about it. But how much of this is hyper-paranoia? How many of these anomalous remote viewing telekinetic type of situations really are this? Or, when we reach a heightened state of alertness, the events don't have to take place, right? They never have to take place. People are just in this heightened state of amygdala reactive behavior, and like I say, the neocortex isn't involved. Some good books to study up on this, if you haven't looked into this, is the original Old School Emotional Intelligence by Daniel Goleman, and it leads into a lot of other areas of behavior and behaviorism. But when people start to get on this chain where they're writing books and they're making money, something is lost when a product is put forth and a solution is esteemed, is sold through assumption. And you can't just assume a psychological aid or tool as a product and say that this type of thing works for every personality, every persona, every variant, every Kiersey temperament sorter type of personality and persona in society. However, I will digress and say that I think that nutrition is at the base, and that learning how to create a good balance where you're able to live in a fasted state, a semi-fasted state. You're using amino acids to heal certain attributes, like the equalizer, where you see your body is in a high histamine or histidine reactive state, and that you require other amino acids for prolonged periods of time, such as glutamine, and the production of gamma aminobutyric acid, to be able to get back into a blood-brain barrier. It's not really the blood-brain barrier, but it's all the executive processes and powers outside of that, And it used to be, this easy assumption that you just bring down inflammation, you bring down high acid, high octane foods, behavior, you get sleep, those things just don't do it when you're living in a wartime situation where people are reactive on like a hairpin trigger. So it requires more, right? It requires an abundance, and it requires war requires a different nutritional value. There's a different type of blood flow occurring. In other words, the majority of your blood through your blood system is in one area more than the other. In other words, when you're in a reactive state, you're not metabolizing, the food isn't centered around your gut and your stomach, right? It's more centered around your periphery, okay? And you end up eating less, you end up getting conditioned to do more. So part of the orthomolecular nutrition plan is long distance walking, and it is also endurance training, and trying to become a smaller, tighter, stronger, and more resilient individual. And this also leads into having to have a discourse with yourself through education, and nothing works better than avoiding highly politicized narratives and looking more at the solutions that people offered in the past that can only be called philosophy. And I talk about this quite a bit on my channel, and we will be studying philosophy, doing long distance walking, probably coming up in the next couple of weeks. I'm a little postponed on this, and staying on an undulating orthomolecular nutrition plan that involves very little carbohydrate bolstering or boosting, probably at most 2 supercompensation days per month, and also relies on the carnivore diet as a backup. So here you've got a survivalist plan. The only thing you really have to do is find a viable fresh water source, and you may be able to find something where you're able to produce water through condensation. I've seen things where they even take these bubbles that are basically sweating out fresh water and creating fresh water stores. And really, how much do you need as an individual? You've got to have at least a gallon of water for yourself, and then another possible 1 to 2 gallons for washing up, boiling. You got to be able to make a fire. But when the shit hits the fan and it comes down to it, you're going to need to be able to find a food source that's ample in fat and protein, again, ample water supply, and then a good, solid, full spectrum amino acid supplement as a backup. Don't try to keep perishable carbohydrates around. It's unnecessary. It's superfluous. Of course, you're going to see people capitalizing on things, trying to sell chocolate bars, trying to sell coffee, trying to sell things like that, but you will get past the initial requirement for that, whether you like it or not, in the first couple weeks of a catastrophe, which we are on the precipice of, either way you look at it, from a political view to a globalist agenda to all-out UN-prompted wartime initiations, to weather manipulation, manipulating weather patterns, to an elitist agenda that wants to take out the average everyday plebeian. You've got to look at things from a multifarious perspective, where it has now reached home, it has now reached the communities, it is now dug into people to where they are living in a heightened state of alertness, the fight or flight response, and it never equals a good thing when people aren't conditionally aware and cannot turn that off. And we are at that point of no return. And I wanted to say that. I recognize that it's in full swing, and you'll see a lot of people who seem overly lackadaisical, and that is a parasympathetic response because they are overloaded and they don't know what to do. So when you see those types of extremes, and it's indicated and indicative with the ultra heightened type A type personality seems to be on the prowl, you've got that dichotomy of both sides showing an imbalance.